Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for being here. It's a historic day. We're going to have a presentation by James Hopkins. And I first met James about 10, 12 years ago when he was doing work. I was at NAU and we were doing work with the Yavapai Apache Nation. Came in and he assisted the tribe in amending their tobacco tax. And about a year and a half later after doing that, the revenue was up over $1 million for the Yavapai Apache Nation. So I have no doubt that James is brilliant, and what we're going to be talking about today is going to be amazing, right, James?
Absolutely.
No pressure. So I think it'd be great if we could go around and do some quick introductions. Once again, I'm Levi Esquera, Senior Vice President, Native American Advancement and Tribal Engagement. And we'll start to my right, Vice Chairman.
Robert Valencia, Vice Chairman, Pasco Tribe. Thank you, Dr. Robbins, for this meeting.
Thank you for being here, Vice Chairman. I'm Bobby Robbins, President of the University of Arizona.
I'm Teresa Miguel Stearns. I'm an Associate Dean, Director of the Law Library, and Professor of Law at the College of Law.
Hi, Shauna Howard, Associate Clinical Professor in the Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy Program.
I'm Paul Bennett, I'm a clinical professor at the College of Law.
Michael Wagenheim, I'm the Assistant Dean of IT and Online Learning at the College of Law.
I'm Tony Massaro. I'm a law professor by day and a high program director by day and night.
24/7.
And a change man. I'm blinking at you, Lloyd.
I'm Edward Cohen, I'm the Associate Dean for Research at the College of Law.
I'm Kyle Matan, I'm a news writer at University Communications. I write a lot of the stories about Levi and team's work and other programs that we have that serve Native students and tribes. And for what it's worth, I'm also a Master of Legal Studies student as of last week. So, thanks.
Good morning, I'm Tina Vargas. I'm a program manager in the Office of Native American Advancement.
Yo soy Chanea Quechemarea. Muy buenos días. My name is Octaviana Trujillo. I'm Professor Emeritus of Applied Indigenous Studies at Northern Arizona University and former Chairwoman of the Pasco-Yaqui Tribe of Arizona. Glad to be with all.
Good morning, I'm James Diamond. I'm the Interim Director of the Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy Program and Professor at the Law School with Professor Hopkins.
Good morning, my name is Fred Urbina. I'm Jim's friend. I'm also the Attorney General for the Pasco-Yaqui Tribe, proud alumni of the law school here. Bear down Friday and Saturday.
Hello, I'm Claudia Nelson. I'm the Director of the Native Peoples Technical Assistance Office, and I report to the Senior Vice President for Research here.
I'm Craig Henderson, Vice President in the President's Office here at U of A, and a close friend of Levi. And he has a lot of initiatives going on. He might not say this, but he's a very busy guy. And we appreciate you convening this for Levi.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Good morning, I'm Ron Marks. I'm the Interim Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Provost.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jacqueline Valenzuela, Executive Associate to Levi at the Office of Native American Advancement.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Levi and staff, for organizing this. And thank you all for attending. My name is James Hopkins. I'm an Associate Clinical Professor here at the College of Law in the Indigenous Peoples Law and Policy Program, where I direct a clinic topically named the Rio Yaqui Human Rights Clinic. So that's what I'll be presenting on today.
So if there's no questions, I'm going to turn over to James and we're going to have some fun. And he's going to be presenting, but feel free to ask questions, because every time I talk to him about this project, I learn so much more by asking questions and getting into details that I've just been fascinated by what I've learned.
Yeah, no, thank you, Levi. And just at the outset, this is a very complicated case, and I think it might be helpful in your own mind to imagine stepping outside of yourself to try to look at this, keeping in mind there are many moving parts, and so it's very easy to get drawn in on one issue and not see the other moving parts that are closely behind it. So just very briefly, a little bit about me. My name is James Hopkins. There's my mom. I'm from Quebec, Canada. If you end up in my community, you'll see the big red colored bridge. So just call me and I can get you out of there. But it's a non-status Algonquin community, and so I've always been fascinated and drawn to issues of social and indigenous justice and the feature of discrimination. Discrimination features heavily in this case, but it's not the discrimination that you might think of in the United States, whether it's through an employment contract. This is deep, long-held beliefs by large institutions with regard to the value of indigenous peoples, and in this case, the Rio Yaqui Pueblos. And I also wanted to thank Rob Williams, who can't be here this morning, but without he allowed me to enroll late in his Harvard Law School Federal Indian Law class, and if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't be here. So I wanted to thank him. And so moving on, I have about maybe 20 minutes, but as Levi said, we can keep it fluid. Let's just quickly talk about what I did. So in 2009, I was asked to have a meeting in the Pueblos. These are the 8 Rio Yaqui Pueblos in Sonora, Mexico, just near the city of Obregon. And it was at that time that a number of colleagues of mine at the Pascua Yaqui tribe joined me, Vice Chairman Robert Valencia being one of them, who has had a long standing interest in the overall well-being of the Pueblos, as well as Chairman Papicio, who unfortunately can't be here this morning as well. But so I've had the privilege of working with Pascua Yaqui over many years on this project. So in 2009, I met with the 8 Rio Yaqui Pueblos. The individual Pueblos have a form of government called the traditional authorities. So there's 8 traditional authorities for the 8 Pueblos. Why 8? What is the significance? There are other Yaqui villages, and there are Yaquis that live in and around those Pueblos, but those Pueblos have, by custom and history, held the delegated authority to legitimately represent the interests of the Rio Yaqui peoples. And this is established and affirmed in a 1937 treaty for all intents and purposes that will come up again in our discussion. So they're not strangers to the Mexican government, and there's a long history that unfortunately I don't have time to get into, but it's a well-established history with numerous agreements, for example, like the 1937 treaty. So by 2011, I filed this petition. It's like a statement of claim before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And the Inter-American Commission is one of 2 quasi-judicial and judicial bodies under the Organization of American States. And so if you're a member of the OAS, when you sign on as a nation state, you automatically have, you take on acceptance of the Inter-American Commission's jurisdiction. And they're like a roving body of inquiry that make these quasi-judicial findings that are binding. And in the case of Mexico, it is all and absolutely binding, because Mexico signed all of the binding treaties under the OAS. And so that's important because Mexico knew early on that there was enormous exposure and liability for what they've been doing over the last 100 years. The petitions filed in 2011, and amazingly, in 2012, to give you an idea that you know you're onto something, the then President of Mexico, Felipe Calderon, who's from the Panista Party, directed his External Affairs Department to offer a friendly settlement. And so that was really interesting, because that doesn't happen. You're supposed to wait years, but within less than 2 years, Mexico was like, would you like to settle? And we said, no, we don't. And there were a number of key things missing that are actually here today at the table on the friendly settlement side now that weren't there then. In 2015, a really important moment happens, which is rare in the Commission's day-to-day workings, is they issued an admissibility ruling. So they made a positive finding of fact on this petition. So it's quasi-judicial. And what this ruling did is it told Mexico basically everything in the petition that's alleged is fact, everything. And then they found some additional facts, and then they also tied in rights to human development that are connected directly with state funding. This will become absolutely crystal clear in a very short moment. So suddenly there's actual talk of serious reparations and restitution. By 2019, we have the onset of the AMLO administration and the Moreno Party, and he's a really interesting president, very unique, and went against the grain of the pre-tradition, and is a populist. Ironically, he's very much against Mexico having any monitoring by human rights bodies, and I say it's ironic because he's really supportive of directing that this settlement agreement that we'll talk about get completed. So in 2019, I made the effort to go to Hermosillo. That's me and AMLO in the airport of Hermosillo where we had our first meeting, and it was really incredible. At that time, he didn't travel with armed guards, and he had a policy of explicitly not working with local police in his security detail. So he has these, the gentleman to the far right is one of his unarmed guards, and I thought for sure I'm going to get tackled. But I was able to go talk to him, and a gentleman, Jacobo Mendoza, who's behind me, he's now a federal member of the Mexican Congress in the Moreno Party. At the time, Jacobo was the state, what they call party whip for the Moreno Party in Sonora. So he was a very important figure and really orchestrated this. So AMLO had noticed that this guy's going to come up and talk to him in the airport. And you can see that in my hand is a letter inviting him to meet in the Pueblos and engage in a friendly settlement discussion. Because I really felt like at this point, he was our last chance on the near horizon. Consequently, AMLO begins his own policy of reconciliation and issues his own decree setting up this plan, the Yaqui Justice Plan, with a commission of multiple departments and many members of the Rio Yaqui community to be a part of. And they compile a very large amount of material and information from which recommendations are made to improve the overall situation, the health and welfare of the Rio Yaqui Pueblos. And as of today, it's translated into real dollars and real funding. So I think just 2 days ago, they officially opened a Yaqui University in one of the Pueblos, and that's one of the legacies of the AMLO administration. And so as we start moving forward under the AMLO regime, by 2022, as I was saying, that this Yaqui Justice Plan gets underway, and I'm still kind of hovering in the background. There I am. This is on national media, and I'm in the crowd there. But I'm the only non-Yaqui in that particular area. That's a very significant area for Yaqui leadership and their advocates. And so this again was part of this ongoing dialogue. I should also mention that another gentleman of significance is just two persons to the right. That's Dr. Adolfo Montes, who's the director of INPI. INPI is their equivalent of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It's an institute, however, which reflects the unique history of Mexico's approach to indigenous peoples. So we're here now at a friendly settlement, and specifically, we actually have the agreement drafted. It's not just good wishes. We're in the final drafting stage, and the friendly settlement is a resolution mechanism to an ongoing case. And once the commission accepts the agreement, it goes into implementation. And so the Inter-American Commission has quarterly meetings to hear from the parties as to how the implementation is going. This is a very unique situation, however, because the Mexican government, AMLO's administration, is so proactively behind the friendly settlement. It's normally confidential. The exact terms are confidential, but once it's signed, there will be a public communications about it, and there will be write-ups and summaries of it, because a lot of it is connected heavily with the Yaqui Justice Plan. And so it fits with this case because the case was a claim for loss of Yaqui land, water, culture, life, liberty, and security, and to be free from discrimination based on Yaqui identity and socioeconomic status. And it's a rolling, complicated case with big ups and downs. I initially started it thinking like, oh, this is a case for loss of indigenous title. But then what you realize in the history is that when they had their land taken from them, stolen from them, right from underneath them, they became, for lack of a better word, squatters on their own land, even though they have a treaty from 1937. At the same time, they have superimposed over them, at the time, one of the largest irrigation districts in the world. And this irrigation district is managed federally by Conagua, which is the federal water authority in Mexico, a very powerful body. And so the Yaquis find themselves living in the midst of these wheat and cornfields and other types of products that we take for granted every day, pineapples, melons, etc. And they don't have any title, and they actually don't even own their land, and yet they still function as a self-determining sovereign group. At the same time, when this happens, they're also dealing with the fact that the river is gone. The river's taken away from them. This, by the way, conceptually took about 5 years for everyone to come to an understanding that when they talk about the Rio Yaqui, you go to Wikipedia and it's like, oh, it's the 10th largest river in Sonora. It's not. It's in the delta where the pueblos are, it's gone. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So as I get involved in the case, thinking, okay, land, water, self-determination, there are these development projects that sort of pop off and cause enormous upheaval. And this is over the span of 15 years. One is the Aqueduct for Independence, and this is when Hermosillo, the city of Hermosillo, the municipality, they build what is effectively like a 112-kilometer straw from Hermosillo going east into the middle Yaqui basin, and they Conagua allocates 75 million cubic meters of water per annum for the city, primarily in the municipality. That was an enormous flashpoint for upheaval and violence, and so that was quite a busy time because I was working on that, but then also digging in further on the public health and environmental toxicology side of things. So if it's like a layer cake, I would say that you have the land and water issues that are the result of these flashpoints of development through the territory, which has been ongoing. And then underneath, you have the suffering in the daily life of the pueblos, namely through the environmental devastation, the toxicology, the air and water pollution that compounds into high rates of Yaqui infant mortality, the denial of basic services, as well as today, which wasn't the case when I first started, a very serious threat posed by ongoing cartel violence. And namely, in my view, it's a place for recruitment of unemployed young Yaqui males. And it also is exacerbated by the fact that the NAFTA highway goes right through the pueblos. So I know that I'm covering a lot, and there will be time for questions, obviously, and you can jump in any time. So what this means is we are at this point with AMLO at this idea of an Indian New Deal, which I think is for those who study federal Indian law, is in reference to 1934, which was a big sea change in the United States. And one of the examples in this friendly settlement is the guarantee that Mexico will work directly with the authorities to get them tax status cards. So I'm saying this because I need to give you the baseline from which we're starting. So these sovereign, self-determining pueblos, as I said earlier, they were like squatters legally. They don't have bank accounts. They don't have a collective entity status beyond good wishes on a piece of paper. So when they go to a bank under Mexican banking laws, they can't open up a bank account as a distinct political and collective unit. So this is something that you would have to do if you're working with indigenous peoples as a government. You need to be able to transfer funds, initiate new programs, and hold people accountable, etc. So there's 5,200 square kilometers that are being put into trust under Yaqui title within this Yaqui territory. There's the delivery of the Yaqui Canal. There's enormous provisions for infrastructure, including a new hospital that's under construction. There's already been a number of schools that have been built and a university, as I mentioned. There's provisions for financial and technical support. The technical support, I think, is a key aspect for interested parties like the university. This would include support for Yaqui enterprises. As well, there's specific capital dollars to target water delivery. The water situation is terrible, for lack of a better description, and I'll show you more about that in a moment. But this is a huge issue because, as I said, the river's gone and the coastal aquifer has collapsed. So in this negotiation, I'm not, coming from Canada, I'm not a very pushy person. We like to make sure everybody's happy and there's some consensus. But so amazingly though, however it worked, I was able to get them to agree that the Yaqui Delta, the Yaqui territory, is a binational piece of property because it's part of the Yaqui Basin, which means that they recognize the upper basin going into Arizona and New Mexico, which is really important because then it can be subject to a number of binational treaties and oversights directly with Mexico and the United States. So that's very important. It's also home to a number of Yaqui species that are critical or endangered as well. So that's huge. The other piece to this was that AMLO, by way of background, was in the Pueblos, I think, in 2022, and my clinic had been working on these types of initiatives, and one of the initiatives that we had worked on was AMLO. I wanted him to sign a decree, but he didn't. But he made an oral declaration that Pascua Yaqui was the 9th Pueblo because they're so close. They're down there every day, and he did do that, and that was really quite something. And so in the negotiations, I followed up and said, I would like the Pascua Yaqui tribe, having worked with Pascua Yaqui tribe, to. I didn't just show up and say, hey, why don't we do this? Like, there was a plan to put this together, and amazingly, Mexico agreed. They were like, yeah, they should be a beneficiary and a signatory, and that really amazed me. There was no argument or back and forth. So I think that's one of the unique aspects to this because it becomes a binational settlement. So there's nothing like this in the history of inter-American jurisprudence, and there's nothing like this in the history of international indigenous human rights law that I'm aware of. Because the agreement is signed by the sovereign state of Mexico in recognizing the extraterritorial rights of a federally recognized Indian tribe. And then I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but one of the things I did do was I really pushed the idea that the Yaqui rights are reserved, which is a concept in the United States, and it simply goes like this. If I'm an indigenous group and you and I have a treaty and it says you can have 50% of the river, what that means is I'm sharing with you. It's not you taking half of the river for yourself. It's sharing. And it means that the remaining 50% I hold as an indigenous group in reserve. And so the idea is that if you don't put it into an agreement, the presumption is that the rights are reserved for the indigenous group. And that's really the story of U.S. tribal water rights, is that the idea is that there's an assumption that tribes reserve those water rights when they were making treaties. So I did that. I'm a bit of a tech nerd too, so I included the electromagnetic spectrum as well, the broadband spectrum. This goes sort of deep down a rabbit hole of debate within the academic community, but I argued successfully that that's actually a natural resource if you look at the applied sciences behind that. And they were happy to do that. And let me just say, it's not that they were, in my opinion, it's not that they're just saying, yeah, we'll just put in whatever you want. I think there's an agreement that we want the strongest, best agreement with the highest level of guarantees, because it makes the resolution of a problem in the future so much easier. We're not going to be holding up the 1937 Parliament's decree and wondering, what did it mean? So there's a short summary of the timeline. I won't go through all the nuts and bolts to it because I'm kind of going a little bit longer than I planned. But basically, by the 5th of September, my edits are going to be with SEGA, which is the executive secretary for the government of Mexico. It's an internal federal department. And my hope is that it has to be by mid-November that this agreement is signed, because the traditional authorities will begin their transition for a new government within each pueblo, and they shut down basically for most of December. So if you're interested in learning more about the Yaqui Justice Plan, you can find it anywhere on Google. This is a link to some of the information on Facebook. It's a very well published document, and I have some video links. But I'll try to just get through some of this. These are some of my personal faves in this story. So I'll get back to that. I just want to make sure I'm covering my bases here, that we all know the point of reference. So this is the Yaqui Basin. It's the largest binational basin between Arizona and the state of Sonora. The Yaquis are down in the very bottom by the Sea of Cortez. And again, like there's this idea that there's this robust river. That's the NAFTA highway. You see the concrete footings, and that's the Rio Yaqui. I mean, it's just a drainage puddle, and it stops right around there. So there's a major issue in terms of recognition vis-a-vis the actual state of the river. This is a picture from the 1920s of the river. This is a biplane photo of Pueblo Bambum, and you can see the big wide bend in the river, and there was just lots and lots of water at that time. One of the things that my clinic had focused on was, even though I've said there's 5,200 square kilometers of tidal, almost 1,000 of those kilometers is in an area of subsidence and where the coastal aquifer has collapsed. And by collapsed, I mean it's actually subsided, and you have these salt pans that are about a half square to a full square kilometer in size. And the Yaquis actually will go in there and do surface salt mining. It's really easy to do because you have this nice layer of salt, and you just have to take a little hammer and crack out these tiles of it. And I can explain some of that, how that works, but this was a mapping exercise that we did where I traveled up the river, and I learned a lot on the fly. I didn't realize for about 3 years what they were saying, that the river is gone. I thought, well, it's diminished, but actually what it is the ocean has gone up the river about 43 kilometers permanently, and it's not even affected by tidal effect. And so, and if you look at the way those canals and the inflow is structured, you can tell it's not inflow. Like if the fresh water was flowing into the ocean, you would have this funnel shape as it gets to the point of contact. And so that kind of gives you a bit of an idea of how serious it is. So I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about the main points that we looked at in this case. I had mentioned that there were at least two really large resource development projects. One was the Aqueduct for Independence, the other was a gas line. And during this whole process, my clinic, in partnership with ITSON and UNISON, we had to also deal with the serious claim that there was a high rate or disproportionate rate of Yaqui infant mortality. And so I had some really good advice from colleagues in public health about how to go about that. My colleague at ITSON, who was a public health expert, assisted in this. And I kind of did the best I could. There is no authoritative study on Yaqui infant mortality. And so in that regard, this was beginning in 2014, I started to do very baseline work in terms of counting crosses in Pueblo Patum with the Yaqui midwives and collecting very bare bones data there. A number of Yaqui women were in agreement to a workshop to talk about their experiences losing their babies, and also others who had babies with long-term permanent birth defects and the like. One of the things that comes up quite a bit is a consistent description of infants dying shortly after birth, within approximately 3 days, usually from some kind of upper respiratory failure. I mentioned earlier there was some discussion or description of some of them having holes in their heart. I noticed as well that some of the participants themselves exhibited signs of birth defects with smaller hands and shorter limbs. A number of them also talked about just constant headaches and such. And so if you're wondering, okay, well, why is it so high? I guess I'll go to one of the videos here. I'll just circle back. And one of the problems is that, there we go, just browse, okay. So this was part of the evidence of the case that we followed a fumigator near Pueblo Mapa. This is edited, so it's very short. So that's DDT, that's Lorsban 480 EM. And so they use the canal to take the concentrate. They use the canal water and they put it into the big truck tank. And then they just dump it in the canal, or they leave it in boxes where goats and cattle will graze, and also where people will have access to it. I noticed they actually left a bunch of unopened bottles in some of the boxes too. So you can see that the practices are totally unregulated and pose a serious hazard to human health. There's a school just down the road from there with a field beside it, so if there's a field, it's going to get sprayed. And so I hope that helps kind of illustrate.
In Barbie Land, everything makes sense.
Little YouTube clip. And I'm just gonna get it up there. So I hope that kind of illustrates the severity of the problem. Let me also mention that during this time, particularly with infant mortality, Mexico took the issue very, very seriously, because I think they knew that they had exposure. One of the strange things, and there's a lot of kind of details to go through that I won't go through, but one of the strange things is this, there's a graph that the Mexican government produced through their Federal Census Bureau, and it's on the previous slide, and it cites Yaqui infant mortality at 16.4%. But then in clear writing on the left side of that same page, they say that it's based on a denominator of 100 live births, and it should be 1,000. So they were struggling with trying to mitigate a very high rate of Yaqui infant mortality. I don't believe it was 164 based on what our study concluded. It was probably in the range of anywhere from 22 to 26, which is extremely high. So this is where the case kind of gets interesting. Because we're exchanging information through the commission, Mexico can see where I'm going, they can see my submissions and my evidence. And at that time, it was the Panista party in Sonora, and they said, well, Hopkins is just not correct. He's making this up, and in fact, we're going to build a state-of-the-art prenatal health clinic in the Pueblos. And I said earlier, discrimination was, I think, an aspect to this case that I can't understate. So just to go back, there's a photo. Where is it? Yeah, this is in the. This was a news announcement that they're building this Yaqui prenatal care unit with ambulance services, etc. And the governor is there. There's a number of other news releases, and the pledge was for several million US dollars. And I'm just trying to get back here to my little YouTube thing. Okay. So what ends up happening is I hear from people in the community saying, well, it's not built. And this part really bothered me. So we went and took a tour of the prenatal health unit. So there's no electrical power lines. That's the first red flag. And then there's fencing around the building with barbed wire pointing outwards to keep people out. It's locked. It's also really strange because the buildings themselves are really tiny. And at this point, there's a family of Yaquis that have already moved in and used it as living space. And so there's just stuff that makes no sense. And so what it was is the government, some individuals using this as an opportunity to embezzle money. And so probably materials ended up at someone's house and funds were diverted to someone's bank account. But it was so cruel to me. I mean, in a moment you'll see that they actually paid a consultant to have Yaqui signs in this supposed ward for evacuating. So it's just so surreal to me that this would happen. And so that one I think was, that marked a real turning point. And I think a turning point in the sense that it wasn't going to be easy for Mexico to continue down this road of basically perpetrating these falsehoods. So later on, just to come back, AMLO is basically saying let's reconcile. He has a National Day of Apology for the Yaquis in this respect. There's a clip from KVOA and a really good interview with Chairman Eucapicio on what this means. And this was just a little over a year ago. But the reality is, as I pointed out, there's enormous challenges in the Delta because most of it's subsided and the ocean has gone through the coastal aquifer. We have still really high rates of infant mortality. So there's some of the conclusions there. And then there's still a major water shortage problem. And so in the summers in particular, what they'll do is they'll have to dig into an area where they think it's a suitable groundwater well. But all of that water is terribly, terribly contaminated. And so there's a lot of areas of further research that I think will be positive in the future once the friendly settlement is put into place. Because I think Mexico will mandate the kinds of public health studies that you would expect to see, like in the United States or Canada, and which Mexico is obliged to do legally under a number of treaties. And so some concluding thoughts. Again, as I mentioned, the friendly settlement will provide external review. There'll be quarterly meetings, but there's also going to be a need and opportunities for third parties for technical support. And I think just one option in terms of the university is to support some dialogue post-signing, a forum, a working group. These are just some ideas. I mean, I know that this is all new information as well, so it would take some time, I think, to digest and take this apart. But I should also mention that there's enormous support at the federal level here in the United States for this. I knew that my case was going to lead to something good when 2 years ago I had just a cold call from the State Department in Sonora from their Nogales office, and they wanted to have me talk to them about why their working group keeps coming up with this observation that AMLO goes to the Pueblos every quarter. And so the area has enormous economic, strategic importance to the United States with the NAFTA highway going through it. And the basin itself is home to a number of protected and threatened species. This is just a small window. That's the Yaqui catfish. It's extinct now in Arizona, but again, Fish and Wildlife and the Department of the Interior are very interested in trying to recover that. There's the Yaqui trout, and then there's the Yaqui trout. It's a very elusive trout, but it's totally indigenous to Sonora, and so it's not in the United States. It's never been. So those are some of the ideas. I know it's a lot to cover, so thank you for listening. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to hear my presentation.
Thank you so much, James. I know we have a little bit of time. Is there any questions before we have lunch for James?
I just want to acknowledge the work that he's done, because he had to literally get this petition from the Lazarus state to revive it because it was going to go. So he found a way of doing it. The mechanisms that occurred afterwards were great. And it's in Yuriaki, our form of government, they change every year, so it's a little difficult sometimes because he has to keep re-educating them. But it's important that the people are there present, and that's the biggest difference between like what we do here and over there is like they always do things in consensus with the community, with pueblos, as he was talking about. And the effects on the women and children, they're terrible. And they have water maybe 1 or 2 days a week. So sometimes you don't store your water, you don't have water. And what we're looking at is the other effects of like Coca-Cola's all over the place, so if there's no water to drink, they'll drink Coca-Cola, which leads to diabetes and all that kind of stuff. So that's how it is. And the President Alvo is the only president that has actually been there, like a reporter, like he was saying. And he's said everything in the open public. I think he has till December, and Mexico only does 1 6-year term. So he's doing as much as he can with his resources for people. But again, we're obliged to Professor Hopkins for the work that has been done, because it's very difficult work.
I have a question for you, Vice Chairman and Professor Hopkins. What can we as a university do to help you? I mean, I had many thoughts going through, but I would love to hear from you. I mean, obviously, with knowledge and expertise around hydrology, environment, public health, what can we do to help you?
One of his colleagues a few years ago there was a group from the agricultural people meeting. So in 5 minutes he was able to outline something they couldn't figure out. So they were like amazed. They would carry him out but it was those type of things. The university has very great resources. We're not always asking for money, but with the start of the university, they're also looking at how is it that we could do maybe possibly undergraduate work over there and see what we can do on this side. So, but in the technical areas, I think those are the things that we look forward to, and we appreciate what's been done and continue to be done here, and we appreciate that you took the time to understand what's going on.
Right. I remember we talked about the catfish from the first time we ever met.
Yeah. So those are things that are really important for people. There's twice as many Yaquis in Sonora than there are here. So it's closer to 40,000.
And what about the hospital and the university? Are those going to be supported by the Mexican government, or how do those work?
Yeah, so my understanding is that they have permanent funding. And initially I was concerned thinking, oh, this is going to be a flash in the pan, but actually it works out that in Sonora the governor is also a Moreno Party member, and so they have essentially hardened the funding for all of these projects. And we have, as you know, like deep relationships with UNAM and UNISON, and I think that would be a very easy go-to, is to look at some type of rural health type of placement, which stopped, unfortunately, as I was showing you. So I think there's some very easy low-hanging fruit that could fit into what the university is already doing. But yeah, I just wanted to assure you that the funding, because this was a huge concern of mine, I thought, I don't wanna be coming back in a year from now when the next president cuts all the funding in. They're not going to. And it would be really difficult for them to do it because it cuts across so many different department budgetary lines. But one thing I was going to mention, I talked to Mr. Urbina about this a good deal, is economic development. And I think that one of the things that the university has strength but could be stronger, like this is a great opportunity to sort of flex its know-how, is in the area of economic development and trade. So just as an example, we know that the Yaquis, they have herds of cattle, herds of goat, but they have no way of getting it to market. And if they could start selling some of their goods here in the United States, they have the NAFTA highway right at their doorstep. That would be a complete game changer. And so that's one of the things that the AMLO administration has also recognized, is that after 60, 70, 80 years of discrimination, they just don't have any connectivity. Like when you talk about economic development there, they'll say, we've talked to some representatives, Vice Chairman, you'll remember, they'll say, oh yeah, we'll send you a bus. How many buses do you want? Because we need people to go work in these fields or at the Maquiladora. And in the pueblos, you'll see the signs for the bus, like when the bus comes, and you can get a day job. And so I think that has to stop. And I think the university has a lot of really good resources and well-intentioned people in that.
What's the solution to the water problem? I mean, I'm struck that it's so close to the ocean, and of course desalination comes to mind, but that's very, very expensive. So what's going to be the solution to water?
So in the short term, what they're doing is they're pulling off of this place called the Oviachic Reservoir north of Obregon. So it's still the Rio Yaqui. It's the last collection point for the Rio Yaqui. And but the solution is, first and foremost, there's no regulation over the river. It's over prioritized. And so getting this into binational status would be a great start to at least having the different riparian users talk to each other from both sides of the border. The other, so when you do this kind of work, you have to have some sense of belief and a sense of optimism, and so I think I've looked at the work that Dr. Carletta Chief has done on water purification. So I think it would be really cool to have like a pilot project. Several people, including Mr. Urbina, have heard me go on about this, and they're very patient. But one of the things I'd like to see is an aquaculture project that remediates and filters the water, but then at the same time, as we were thinking about the Yaqui catfish, allows them to grow a sustainable crop of freshwater fish with surplus either for sale locally. But one of the big problems is, particularly with pregnant mothers, is they catch the larger fish out of the canal, these apex predators that have tested, they have alderin in them. So that was my first sort of idea, was we would have this sort of circular, sustainable aquaculture project, but I don't think it's actually too far removed from possibility, and maybe even just a prototype would help. A very easy example, they turn the electricity off in the pueblos. There's usually like 1 central meter per pueblo. If we had solar and secured it, which I believe we could do, even though there's instability in the area, there's a number of large families that would work, I think, rigorously to protect those types of assets. So I think, you know, I'm a bit of a dreamer. I think Tony will vouch for this. She's like, oh my God, he's going to be selling coffee in the lobby to support the cause. But I think if we look at the resources that we have readily available, we can start in that sense.
I also going to mention there was a former dean of the College of Medicine that we had initiated conversations with telemedicine. Yeah, this is a while back, and I've talked since then with our medical director, who's also, I think, here. But those are some of the things that would make a lot of sense over there, particularly when they have a facility in which, you know, they can form facilities, bring some of the people out here. I think that's what they're doing.
It was an observation, and I just wanted to make a general comment. You know, I I've had the pleasure and honor to be with the Vice Chairman Valencia, Professor Hopkins, in Rio Grande, and I just really acknowledge and respect the tenacity and the persistence that Hopkins and Mr. Valencia had in continuing with this human rights case. I went to assist where I could in January, February on this case. It's very, very cold, and to sit under the traditional gramada in Botão or Vietnam for hours, and it's very traditional. It's very different than our government here, or tribal government. There is a traditional governance with many protocols. And then, so very, very cold for hours and hours, but it was important for us to be there. And then just the summer, then it's very, very hot. So and you sit out there, whether it's very, very cold, very, very hot, but it's just very traditional how you work with the traditional Yankee authorities in this very, very long, tedious, important process for this human rights case. And I think it's getting to that point where, we'll see the fruits of the labor for all those individuals, whether they are those students in the law college, tribal members, colleagues, friends who have been on this long journey to bring justice to the Yankee territory. And I offer my service because they are my relatives, they are my ancestors. So it's very important to do what we can. I'm also the chair of the Joint Public Advisory Committee. It's a trilateral secretariat for the Commission for Environmental Cooperation. It was established many years ago as part of the NAFTA deal. And the new NAFTA, the secretariat is in Montreal. We have now put forward for the very first time at the council session in Victoria at the end of June. We're all in agreement as far as those advisors. They're all appointed by the three countries to advise the three parties, Canada, US, and Mexico. And we want us to begin talking about and working on indigenous peoples' trade and the economy. And again, another opportunity for those in academia, those in state, federal, local governments, to really see how, as indigenous peoples of North America, can really take advantage of really having economic development, but on our terms as indigenous peoples. So thank you, James Hopkins. Thank you all for what you do in helping Professor Hopkins, because it's been many, many years, and I think I just want to acknowledge what has been done by many of you in this room to really support the work of Professor Hopkins.
My granddaughter just started here last week, and I think I spoke to her 20 times about this, so she's now in environmental science.
All right.
But we need more of them, so. Again, we appreciate the time and the efforts that are in everybody that's here. We have our tribe and our people that are in Julia. Because we're getting close to the new, I shouldn't call it new deal, but we're getting close to the end here, or the beginning. Whatever, however we count it. It's really exciting for us to know that something can be done.
The College of Law and IPLP are very, very proud to support this groundbreaking work. We have Professor Hopkins work. This is complex, sophisticated legal and advocacy and working with the community as a vital partner with the university. And we have a long-standing commitment to human rights advocacy and experts, sitting around this table, like Professor Howard, who, works every day with our students and with the United Nations Special Rapporteur in our building. And so our students are blessed with that opportunity to learn and to make progress like that internationally. So I'm very appreciative of all the work going on, and our students are doing, Professor Hopkins is doing, Professor Howard is doing, and other members of the faculty and students. A couple of questions. Does the agreement actually recognize Pasquayaki?
They're actually signatories. And there's an internal process at Pasquayaki to ratify any agreement, and so this is they're in the agreement.
Well, that's quite profound.
Yeah,
that's quite profound. My other question is, it's an irony, and you mentioned this about U.S. treaty law and the reservation of rights. In the U.S., and I don't know if this applies in the U.S., with several important holdings of the U.S. Supreme Court, Winans and Winters and Menominee, the granting of rights is a reservation. It comes from Aboriginal people, right, to everyone else. It starts with Aboriginal people who hold Aboriginal rights to land, water, culture, resources, and it's giving from indigenous people, from Yaqui to Mexico. It doesn't sound the other way around. And reservations, all right, we have everything. We have the full ball of rights. We're going to give you something and hold back the rest. It's an irony. It's an irony. But it starts with the people having those rights from time immemorial, right? And I wonder if that's also, it is the case in the United States, but many people don't realize. Is that the case in Mexico as well?
Yeah, and I just used a lot of good evidence from the Cardenas decree in 1937 and what he was thinking. And it's beyond the scope of the meeting, but the University of Arizona actually has a number of rare collections. There are former faculty from the 1920s and 1930s who were deeply involved in Mexico, and so there's a lot of sharing of ideas. So my point to them, and they didn't reject it, is that Cardenas, the president, knew what he was doing when he said they would get half, we would get half, and they would keep the remainder. I also, before I forget, I wanted to thank Dean Miller. Couldn't be here today, but he's been very, very patient and very supportive in providing ideas. And I wanted to see if Mr. Urbina wanted to comment, seeing as this case started when you were a student.
No, I just want to echo what people have been saying about this whole process and the work that Professor Hopkins has done. Has been incredible through the university, and just seeing this be at the stage it's at right now, it's incredible to think about. But also, there's tons of history. There's stories that still haven't been told that are part of this. The original reason for the decree, there was still Yaqui people dying, fighting for these rights, binationally, support coming from here. Every conflict you can think about across the world was, this was happening here. So that's the genesis of what we're talking about. So it's kind of going back. I think it's important to probably for President AMLO to think about that, and it's part of his apology. So call it reparations, call it what you want, call it justice. It'll never be enough, but it's really we're there. So thank you, Professor Hopkins, for all the work you've done.
Thank you. And I should mention, to put it into perspective, and Shauna Howard is here. How she's more of an expert than I am in this area. How common is it for a government to do what they're doing right now?
or to achieve a friendly settlement, which is very rare. And we've worked before this international body for many years, and they received thousands of petitions from all over the Americas, and they're chronically understaffed and under-resourced, and so you have to be on them. You have to be submitting information, meeting with them in DC, or else they'll archive these petitions, which I think you were talking about before, how Professor Hopkins revived it. And especially getting the cooperation with the government. It's essentially like an international mediation where the two parties come together in an adversarial process and make an agreement, so it's quite an achievement.
And I think the percentile of cases that succeed is less than 3%. So to actually, in my view, to get this far that's not something I expected when I first started in 2009. But I also didn't realize it was this difficult. So.
James, thank you so much. We have lunch outside waiting for us, and traditional with Yaki's, right? You have a prayer. So Vice Chairman, could you have a blessing on the food for us?
I'll say it in English.
Okay.
So, and please. As we again break bread, we give thanks to our Creator, Itomachai, for everything that He's done to bring us together, and again for the breaking of the bread, and we bless the food that He has given us. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. James will be here answering questions for lunch, right? Working lunch?
Yeah.
All right. That's how I roll sometimes.